When we think of ancient Sparta, what comes to mind? Disciplined soldiers, red cloaks, gleaming spears held in perfect formation. A society built for one purpose: war. But what was the human cost of that incredible war machine? Not just for the soldiers on the front lines, but for the families they left behind, and for the families of those they defeated? Today, we're diving into a lesser-known and frankly disturbing side of Spartan power: how they treated the wives, widows, and families of their enemies. The evidence is fragmented, and historians still debate its meaning, but what we do know points to practices that most of us would find completely unspeakable. We'll look at the unique status of women in Sparta, the brutal realities of ancient Greek warfare, and the specific Spartan practices that turned families into tools of the state. So why did Sparta do this? And how should we understand it today? Let's find out. First, to understand how the wives of defeated warriors were treated, we need to understand the role of women in Sparta itself. Now, compared to other Greek cities like Athens, Spartan women had a surprising amount of freedom. They could own property, inherit land, and were even given physical training. They were famous across the Greek world for being strong and independent. But this freedom existed within a society that was completely organized around the military. The perfect Spartan woman was one who could produce healthy, strong children, especially sons who would grow up to be elite soldiers. So, a woman's value was deeply tied to her ability to create the next generation of warriors and to manage the household while the men were off at war or living in their barracks. This tells us two key things. Spartan women weren't powerless, but they were still part of a culture where the strength of the army was the absolute highest priority. Now let's zoom out to the wider context of ancient Greek warfare. When one city-state defeated another, the consequences for the losing side were often devastating. It wasn't just the soldiers who suffered. Civilians, especially women and children, were often taken as captives. Their fates could vary wildly. Some were enslaved, others were given away as prizes of war, or forced into humiliating new roles. The legal and moral rules of the time were far, far harsher than what we'd consider acceptable today. So, when a Spartan army conquered a neighboring city, the question of what would happen to the wives and families of the defeated soldiers was a very real and urgent one. So what do our historical sources actually say about this? One of the most telling clues we have is a strange institution known as the Epeunacti. The name literally means those who go into the bed. According to ancient writers, during a long and costly war against their neighbors, the Messenians, Sparta was facing a manpower crisis. To solve this, they took men from the subjugated helot class, the state-owned serfs who worked the land, and commanded them to sleep with the widows of the Spartan soldiers who had died in battle. The goal was simple and ruthless: to produce more children who could one day become Spartan citizens and replenish the army's numbers. This practice tells us something crucial about the Spartan mindset. They were willing to use marriage and reproduction as a state-controlled tool to maintain military strength. Now, while the sources don't give us explicit, step-by-step details about what happened to the wives of the enemies they conquered, we can connect the dots. The Spartans were famously brutal towards anyone who wasn't a full Spartan citizen. There are accounts of them being allowed to kill helots simply for being too smart or too fit, fearing they might one day revolt. Given this context, it's not hard to imagine a grim scenario. When a Spartan army was victorious, the women of the defeated city could be stripped of their status, forced into marriages with Spartans or even helots, or taken as concubines. They would become living symbols of their people's defeat and humiliation, their lives and bodies repurposed to serve the needs of their conquerors. It's crucial to add a note of caution here. Modern historians are right to point out that some of these ancient accounts might be exaggerated. Some of it could even be anti-Spartan propaganda written by their rivals, like the Athenians. But the existence of the Epeunacti is a powerful piece of evidence. It shows that Sparta had mechanisms for controlling the lives of women, especially widows, in a way that we would find deeply oppressive today. Let's dig a little deeper into this idea of the Epeunacti. The name itself, those who go into the bed, is so direct and chilling. It wasn't about love or partnership. It was a state-mandated function. Why would a society do this? The answer lies in Sparta's biggest weakness: its constantly dwindling population of citizen warriors. Every soldier lost in battle was a devastating blow to the state. The wives of these dead warriors were a valuable resource that couldn't be wasted. They were of childbearing age and had already been part of the Spartan system. So instead of allowing them to remarry freely or remain single, the state stepped in. They were assigned new partners, often from a lower social class, for the specific purpose of procreation. The moral implications are staggering. A woman's grief, her future, and even her own body were not her own. They belonged to the state. Her life became another cog in the great Spartan war machine. For the wife of a defeated enemy, the situation was likely even worse. She would face forced subjugation, the complete loss of her freedom, and a life of shame, serving the very people who destroyed her home. Even if the most extreme abuses weren't written down, the cold logic of Spartan society points towards unspeakable possibilities. So, why Sparta? What was it about their culture that made these practices not only possible but logical to them? First and foremost, their entire society was built on militarism. Everything, education, art, family life, was secondary to the needs of the army. If a practice, no matter how harsh, helped maintain the warrior class, it was considered necessary. Second, as we've seen, Sparta was obsessed with its population problem. The constant threat of their citizen numbers falling too low created a desperate, pragmatic approach to survival. Third, there was an intense social stigma around defeat. In the Spartan worldview, losing a war was the ultimate shame. The families of the defeated, particularly the women, became physical embodiments of that failure, making them vulnerable to symbolic punishment. And finally, the Spartan state had incredible authority over what we would consider private life. Marriage and having children weren't just personal choices, they were duties to the state. This fusion of public and private life created a system where the defeated were not just conquered, but completely absorbed and repurposed by the victor. Their families, their futures, and their very identities were crushed under the heel of Spartan dominance. Now, as we wrap up, it's important to remember that modern scholarship is a field of active debate. Some historians argue that the stories about the Epeunacti are overblown, written by later authors who wanted to make Sparta seem more alien and tyrannical than it really was. Others, like the historian Paul Cartledge, emphasize that even with their famous freedoms, Spartan women's lives were ultimately defined by their role in producing strong warriors for the state. So we have to be careful with the evidence. But when you combine the ancient sources with modern analysis, a powerful picture emerges. The wives of defeated warriors in the Spartan world faced a terrifyingly uncertain future. They could be stripped of their status, forced into state-controlled unions, and made to live as constant, painful reminders of their people's downfall. When we remember Sparta, we should remember the heroism and the discipline, but we must also remember the dark social machine that powered it. Behind the glory of the battlefield were the lives of those caught in the gears, the women and families whose stories are often lost in the long shadow cast by those proud Spartan warriors. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into the darker side of history illuminating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did you know about this aspect of Spartan society? What surprised you the most? Until next time, remember that history is rarely black and white.